Good morning and welcome to the public part of the committee's fifth meeting in 2025, and I remind all members and witnesses to ensure that their devices are on silent. 2026. I've just been reminded. We're actually in 2026. Fifth meeting in 2026. And we've had apologies from Megan Gallagher this morning. We'll begin our public meeting with agenda item 2, having already considered agenda item 1 in private. And the first public item on the agenda is to decide whether to take items 8 and 9 in private. Are we all agreed? We're all agreed. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence on the Visitor Levy Amendment Scotland Bill from the Minister for Public Finance, Ivan McKee, MSP. And the Minister is accompanied today by his officials, Fiona Campbell, who's the Visitor Levy and Cruise from the Visitor Levy and Cruise Ship Levy team, who's the leader. David Story is the head of local taxation policy. David, yeah. Kaylee Blair, who's a solicitor, and Michael Pulaski, who's a solicitor, and Susan Robb, also another solicitor. They're not here. Are they online?
They might not arrive because they might be here for the SSR.
Right, okay. So I welcome you all to the meeting. During this evidence session, we're also going to be taking the opportunity to ask about the 3 following items of subordinate legislation related to the existing Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024. And those are the Visitor Levy Local Authority Assessment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft, the Visitor Levy Review and Appeals Scotland Regulations 2026 draft, and the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024 Amendment Regulations 2026 draft. Now, these 3 instruments are laid under the affirmative procedure, which means the Parliament must approve them before they come into force. Now, following this evidence session, the committee will be invited at the next agenda item to consider motions to approve those instruments. And I remind everyone that the Scottish Government officials can speak under this item, but not in the debate that follows on the instrument. So just wanted to also say that there's no need for you to operate your microphones. We'll do that for you. And I now invite the Minister to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the opportunity to set out the purpose of the Visitor Levy Amendment Scotland Bill and to explain how it delivers enhanced flexibility for local authorities by introducing an additional basis of charge, and how it supports the practical implementation of local schemes through further provision relating to third-party arrangements and returns. I will also outline the purpose of the 3 affirmative regulations being considered alongside the bill today. I'm grateful to the committee for its consideration of the bill and the accompanying affirmative regulations, and for the constructive engagement with COSLA, local authorities and industry throughout the process. First on the bill, I understand the committee heard from key stakeholders on 27th January, and I would like to reinforce some of the points heard at that time, as well as to highlight key measures in the bill. The bill makes additional provision in respect of certain third-party sales arrangements, reflecting the operational issues raised by local authorities and industry. And I recognise that progressing this legislation at pace presents challenges, but I'm confident that with appropriate support and proportionate scrutiny, we can work together ensuring the system works for all local authorities while maintaining clarity for businesses and visitors. The bill has introduced bills on the existing powers for a visitor levy set out in the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024 and is intended to introduce positive changes. Key measures including introducing new flexibilities, making further provision on chargeable transactions, adjustments to returns and regulation making powers. Taking these in turn. Introduction of new flexibilities allows local authorities to design and implement a visitor levy model that is right for their local area, such as schemes based on a fixed amount or range of different fixed amounts as an alternative to a percentage-based model. These fixed amounts may be tailored towards accommodation type, size, location or season. The purpose of this legislation is to strengthen the options available to local authorities so they can design a model that works for these areas. And we will also look to build on this legislation by providing updated statutory national guidance for local authorities, ensuring the levy is understandable for visitors. The bill also makes further provision for circumstances in which overnight accommodation is first sold to a third party for onward sale, ensuring clarity for local authorities and providers operating in such arrangement. This flexibility is important. And the bill makes an adjustment to the returns to be made by accommodation providers so that returns relate to the period in which liability for the levy arises. The regulation-making powers will help provide a mechanism for future-proofing the visitor levy framework by ensuring further operational regulations can be brought to Parliament if needed. The suite of 3 affirmative regulations demonstrates how primary and secondary legislation work together to support implementation, and these regulations provide operational detail based on powers in the 2024 Act. While they have not been the subject of a standalone consultation, their content reflects feedback gathered during wider engagement with COSLA, local authorities and industry throughout development of the visitor levy framework. Turning to the suite of 3 affirmative regulations, I remain committed to delivering a framework that delivers a well-managed visitor levy that works in the interests of visitors, local residents, local authorities and industry, and these regulations support that process. Firstly, the Visitor Levy Local Authority Assessment Scotland Regulations 2026 will ensure the visitor levy is administered fairly, transparently in a way that supports compliance. They set out the notice to be given of the intention of a local authority to make its own assessment of the visitor levy payable, what will happen once the assessment has been carried out, and the circumstances in which the outcome of an assessment may be altered. The Visitor Levy Review and Appeal Scotland Regulation 2026 will ensure the process of a review of local authority assessments and decisions on visitor levies clear and transparent, as the measures include specifying the manner in which local authorities must conduct such reviews, the process for bringing an appeal before the first-tier tribunal for Scotland, and the actions local authorities must take following disposal of an appeal. And finally, the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024 Amendment Regulations 2026 will extend the exemption. That means the levy is not payable or may be reimbursed where a visitor is entitled to certain disability or health-related benefits, allowances or payments, so that it applies to a wider range of payments. So in conclusion, Convener, overall the measures in this bill and regulations are part of our vision for the visitor levy in Scotland that aims to improve visitor services without adversely impacting on the local economy and placing a financial burden on local residents as we look to share the unique experience of our history, culture, landscapes and warm hospitality. I will continue to listen to the information shared by stakeholders and the committee, and I'm happy to reflect on any recommendations made. And I and my officials look forward to answering any questions you may have on the bill and its regulations. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that statement and the points that you made in there. So we'll move to questions. I'm going to open with a theme around balancing flexibility and simplicity. So at the last evidence session, we had local authorities talking about flexibility, and we heard industry talking about simplicity. So those were the 2 key kind of terms that we heard, desires really from both sectors. So I think from the evidence we've taken and also from hearing what you say, the Scottish Government's trying to balance the calls for flexibility from local government and the need for simplicity from businesses and customers. I'd be interested to hear from you a couple of concrete examples of what councils will be able to do under this bill that they can't do now, and how you will make sure that those choices don't turn into what people were talking about last time around the confusing patchwork for businesses and visitors.
Well, so at the core of the bill is the ability for local authorities to operate a flat rate or a tiered flat rate system instead of, or indeed alongside, a percentage-based system. And I think that that move has the benefit of both increasing flexibility but also increasing simplicity, because one of the things that business was calling out for was the opportunity for local authorities to be able to implement a flat rate system where they felt that was the right thing to do. So as I say, that is the core change that we're making. It gives local authorities more scope in terms of what that they can the way that they can design the levy, but also allows businesses to be able to engage with local authorities through the consultation and make the case for a fixed rate system where they feel that's more appropriate. Okay,
thanks. So, as you say, this bill is going to introduce the flat rate option that can be designed in different ways. You mentioned in the opening statement that can be fixed or a range of fixed amounts, and also the percentage as well. So I'd be interested to hear, in your view, what the minimum level of simplicity that should be expected, so that the flat rate doesn't become lots of tiers and exceptions that are harder to run than a percentage levy.
Well, exceptions are different, right? And in terms of how that operates, in terms of individual exemptions, then... Oh, exceptions,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, that's
sorry.
right.
I'm getting ahead
So
of myself
lots of
here.
different tiers. Let's focus
Absolutely.
on that.
So I think that will depend on the local circumstances, because the visitor economy in different bits of the country is different. And to be honest, if you are a business, you are typically operating in one part of that. So you're either a hotel chain, or you're a campsite, or you're a bed and breakfast, or you're whatever. So from your perspective, it's simple in the sense that what affects you is within certain bounds, and is typically only likely to be either one flat rate or indeed a percentage model, regardless of what's happening in other parts of the visitor economy locally. And I think from a visitor's perspective, to be honest, anyone that's travelled in Europe or further afield will be used to paying these. And I don't think I've ever get very exercised about the fact that when I go to Paris, it's a different basis from what it is in Amsterdam. It's not something that, frankly, most visitors would even think about, never mind get confused about. So I think from that perspective, there's it does offer, the changes to the bill offers, as I say, more flexibility for local authorities, but also allows simpler systems to be operated for businesses within certain tiers of the economy where that's more appropriate.
Okay, thanks. I just want to come back to the original Act has just a percentage, and now we're bringing in the flat rate, fixed or tiered. When the concerns came up after the Act came forward about the percentage rate, and I think we heard last week in the previous evidence sessions, that the percentage rate was challenging for some potentially smaller providers. Could you just kind of go into that a little bit more, kind of explain what did you unearth in that? Because the percentage rate is actually a progressive charge. It's in a way, if it could have worked everywhere, it would have actually been great for everyone, because it's a fairer way of administering the levy. But so what were some of the issues that led you to realise that actually we needed that variety? I know it's flexibility and simplicity is what we're calling out, but was there some technical things in the background that just made it unworkable, that made the percentage unworkable? So
that's an important point, and it's a common misunderstanding around the nature of the percentage versus the flat rate or tiered flat rate system. The tiered flat rate, if designed, can be more progressive than a percentage system. Okay, so that's really important to recognise. A percentage system obviously charges on the percentage of what the visitor pays for the accommodation, but it's perfectly possible to design a tiered system that charges effectively a higher percentage on more expensive stays and a lower effective percentage on cheaper stays. So the idea that somehow the percentage system is inherently more progressive, I think, is a misunderstanding. And in terms of if you think about it, if you're an operator running a small bed and breakfast or whatever, with a percentage system, you might have different rates for different rooms at different times of the week and at different times of the season, and you're having to calculate a percentage on each of those. You're having to take out the non-accommodation parts of that, which itself is going to be, to some extent, at the best will in the world. It's hard not to see how that wouldn't be subjective, and given cost structures and charging mechanisms and so on. And you've also got the issue of third-party sales. So it takes you into a whole complicated world of many multiple variables. And if you're a small operator with 2 or 3 or 4 rooms, frankly, you've got a million other things to be worried about without having to get your head around all those calculations. Whereas the fixed rate for any given type of accommodation, it's how many rooms were filled times the rate. There's your number. It's a much easier process.
Okay, that was helpful. Thanks. I just wanted to go into the bit around the fact that there could be different percentage, tier, flat used in the same areas. So just going to clarity on that does the bill actually allow a council to run 2 different visitor levy approaches in the same area? A percentage for some accommodation and a tiered flat rate for others.
Sorry.
Yeah, and so could it be that one business could end up being subject to both a percentage and a flat rate?
So, it will allow a local authority, and officials will keep me right, it would delve into the technicalities here. It will allow a local authority to have a different basis of charge in different parts of the local authority area, or also for different types of accommodation, but you wouldn't have a situation where the same provider or the same accommodation unit was being charged on both bases at the same time. Yes, I've got that right.
Okay. So just for clarity, so if you had on a street in Inverness, say,
yes.
you have a hotel and you have a B&B,
yeah.
you might have the hotel at a percentage rate
yeah.
and the B&B on a tiered flat rate.
Potentially, yes. But they wouldn't. The same accommodation provider wouldn't be getting charged on both bases.
I wouldn't
yes.
have that mix,
Correct.
but you'd have
yeah.
hotel, B&B, 2 different rates, but on the same street.
But it's important to recognise that that would require the council to decide that that was a wise thing to do.
Well, that's what I was going to. That was going to be. I was going to ask if that's a good idea or a recipe for confusion and a sense of uneven treatment. But I guess that's for them at their consultations and all that
yeah.
kind of thing to be thinking about.
As I said earlier, I think we can get too concerned about that because at the end of the day, if you're the hotel chain and you're a percentage, frankly, you don't care what the guy next door is doing, and likewise, he doesn't care what you're doing because they're just following their process. And if you're a visitor, you'll book in and you'll get charged what you get charged, and it'll be what it'll be based on the mechanism. So I think we can get too concerned about things not all being the same everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what we were just trying to get at was the kind of could it be that an operator ends up getting mixed up in 2 schemes? That's clear. That's not going to happen. So thanks for that clarity. Okay, we're going to move on. Oh, you got anything else? Okay, going to move on into issues with the per person option, and I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. The Association of Scottish Self-Caterers, in their evidence, was requesting that the per person per night option was going to be problematic in reality. So would the Scottish Government consider removing that per person per night option? Because they certainly feel that it does create some anomalies and we would better not to be there.
Yeah, it's a good point. First to say that the SSC, along with STA and other industry bodies, we've engaged very closely with and have a very effective dialogue. And to be honest, it was reassuring to hear their perspective on the level of engagement. I think that's testament to the officials that have worked on this legislation in recent months. To be honest, I think we're open-minded on that. I think it comes back to the point the convener made about there is a balance between flexibility and simplicity, and finding where that balance should be struck is something that these evidence sessions are helping us to clarify, along with our engagement, and we've obviously got opportunities in stage 2 and stage 3 to make amendments. I think it was interesting to hear I say the strength of feeling, I suppose, from the industry sector about the complexities that the per person per night could raise. From local authorities in your evidence session, I heard, and obviously this was just one contribution, there will be other views perhaps out there that we'll engage on, but I heard they saw the flexibility as being helpful, but they didn't see it as being something that was critical, if I can put it that way. So I think that we are very open on that. The one thing I have asked officials to identify is the range of circumstances whereby that would have an impact, and I think we're talking about obviously accommodations where you would have many people staying potentially, and so just to understand how big a part of the market that is, how significant this is, so we can get a bit more data around about the impact of that.
Because I think trying to, as you rightly identify, trying to get the balance right is what we're trying to achieve here, so that there's not a burden on these organisations or these individuals. But the whole idea of looking at a per person could be very challenging within some of those types of accommodation, depending on how many people are staying and how many nights some of these people are staying. Because the sector themselves have said that it opens a can of worms in some ways for them, and that it really could be unworkable to try and manage to ensure, because how do you gauge if there are, depending on the timescale, the length of the duration that people are there, and how many actually do stay overnight or are within the accommodation, depending on what their movements are. If they're travelling around and coming back and forward at different times and at different dates, then that causes some difficulty for the number of people that might be there. So do you see that as an unworkable process?
So I think it's got like everything in this process. There are challenges, and we need to address them based on the evidence that's there. So I do see the challenges that presents. Again, officials keep me right here, but if I'm not mistaken, the basis of charge for per person per night would be on the capacity of the accommodation rather than the number of people that take up the accommodation. Is that, please, David?
So the way that is currently drafted, it would be based on at check-in. That's when the chargeable transaction becomes liable, as with the existing legislation. I think the important thing here to emphasise is that the way it's drafted, there would be no presumption that a local authority should use a per person per night. It's a discretionary local tax, and as the Minister said earlier, a local authority would have to design and consult on that scheme, and it would have to be right for that local area, which of course would involve consultation with industry in that local area. So what I think we're trying to get the balance here of is, as the convener said, it's that balance between simplicity versus flexibility. And that is clearly one of the things that we're looking at. And I think when we engaged before the bill started, we were asked by the committee to consider international examples. And of course, per person per night is something that is used very widely on the continent. So I think it's right that it's here for us to consider and take evidence. And of course, as the Minister said, we're listening, and we'll look at that as we go through the process.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. Oh. Excuse me. No idea. Oh, suddenly I'm very popular in the middle of a committee meeting. WebEx. Okay, I was going to say I was going to say something. Now I've lost my train of thought. Oh yes. So what you're saying is that you'll potentially keep that per person per night option, and again, it's for local authorities to do that consultation and find out what works, and that's that flexibility piece.
Certainly, as drafted, the bill at this stage, that's the presumption. But as the Minister said, we're listening, and I'm sure as part of that we would look at the committee recommendations as well, in forming an opinion. But obviously, it's for the Minister to decide.
Just given the nature of the kind of speediness of this piece of legislation we're working on, it would be, I mean, it's interesting to hear you're going to listen, you're listening, you're going to look at our report, but are there already any stage 2 government amendments being considered?
Of course, I mean, we're always working on the basis of what might happen, and those are political decisions for the Minister based on the evidence from stakeholders. We continue to engage with the SSC, SDA and COSLA and local authorities. Met with them last week, listening to I suppose, feedback on these particular issues. We're very clear on what industry thinks based on the evidence from last week and also in engagement, and I think we're in a clearer position about what local authorities think. And I think it roughly summarises what evidence you got last week as well. You got a very clear picture of what both camps, if you like, think, and therefore we are preparing options for the Minister, and the Minister will obviously make those decisions. Great. So, but I suppose, Convener, while it's an expedited process, we're just effectively doing what we would normally do at a much more rapid pace.
Yes, well, that's very much appreciated. I'm now going to bring in Evelyn Tweed, and we're moving to a new theme, which is the national cap, a national cap.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Minister, and good morning, officials. Thanks for your answers so far. Obviously, local government and the tourism sector take quite different views on various aspects of the visitor levy. But is the Scottish Government open to the idea of having a maximum cap on how much can be charged included in the legislation?
I think it's something we'd be happy to take evidence on and consider, but I think it's also important to recognise that if, and going back to the point we made earlier about the proportionality of the scheme, so if you've got a scenario where somebody's paying £300 or £400 a night for a hotel room, then where would you set a national cap or even more in that scenario? So I think we need to be cognisant of the fact that a national cap to some extent could mitigate against proportionality on very expensive accommodation. So I think it's something we're interested to hear views on. I think it's more complicated than just assuming that keeps the price down for those in lower priced accommodation.
So it is something that you would consider if there was good evidence? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. And now we're going to move on to another theme, consultation requirements and options available to councils who've already announced percentage schemes. And I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. I just wanted to ask what the government's thinking was on those councils who've used the existing legislation, they've done the consultation, they're now going through that 18-month wait period. If they choose to take a different decision, move away from a percentage rate to use the new powers that might be available to go for a flat rate, is the government given any consideration to potentially waiving the consultation requirement, shortening the consultation requirement, and any discussions around that 18-month wait period?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very cognisant of that. The 18-month is still in the legislation as it is at the moment, but I think that's one area where there absolutely will be changes to that. We didn't want to put something in at this point until we'd heard the different perspectives on where that should be pitched. I think everyone's got an interest in that period being shorter, and I think you heard that in evidence, and that's something we're absolutely willing to support on. There are clearly different scenarios in there depending on what's happened. There's bringing it in from scratch. There is making a change from one scheme to a different basis of charge. There is making a change perhaps to the percentage rates that you're charging if that's the route that you've chosen to go down, which is clearly to some extent inflation proof, so it's different to what you would do on a review of flat rate structure, which you would periodically have to review based on it. So I think there's a range of scenarios there, and we're interested to hear what the different perspective of industry and local authorities is on the best place to pitch that. But I think, yeah, you're absolutely right, that there would be a much shorter period for some of those scenarios. And you're absolutely right, there's also the councils that are in the process at the moment and have started to go down one road. It's clearly nobody's interest to reset the clock and bring them right back to the beginning. The question is, what should that period be, I think, and what should it apply to? So that's what we're interested to hear evidence on.
Yep, that's good to hear the government is open on that, and I just wonder if I could push a bit further on one of the scenarios you set out where a local authority adopts the flat rate and do need to go through that regular process of updating for inflation. I wonder if that particular scenario of an authority updating a flat rate on inflation is perhaps something that should be exempt from a more detailed consultation process. Yeah,
I mean, one of the principles in the bill, we've tried to keep this is to change as little as possible, if that makes sense, because the more you more they touch, the more you get the risk of breaking something or creating unintended consequences. So putting in place a complicated scenario whereby you need to refer back to inflation rates, and based on this scenario you can do that, on this scenario you can do this, does get a bit potentially complicated. And I suppose you want to avoid a situation where automatic up rate leads you into a world where you get some very strange and non-rounded numbers being used, which is clearly not not helpful. But I think we're giving some thought as to what that would look like. I would imagine in the real world what would happen is local authorities every, I don't know, 3 or 4 years might look at the thing and upgrade charges as they do with other charges in their control. But I think we're open to a simple mechanism that allows that to be a fairly straightforward process that they can implement. You need to give some running time, obviously, for businesses to be able to change systems and understand what's coming down the track, but it absolutely wouldn't make sense for that to be an 18-month period where it takes you from one financial year into the next one and into the one after that. Clearly that doesn't, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Minister.
Thanks, Mark. I've got a question around the regulating powers in Section 6, which is the power to make further provisions about the operation of the 2024 Act. I'd be interested to understand how the Scottish Government foresees using these regulating making powers.
Yeah, and officials might want to come in on this, but to my mind, it's to give us the ability to deal with unintended consequences. So if you're going to ask me the scenarios, I can't tell you because it's unknown unknowns at this point in time. And I suppose if you look back at the history of why we're here, everybody obviously looked at this in a lot of detail back in the run-up to 2024. But clearly there are unintended consequences that we're working through now. So where those are minor of nature, it gives the ability by going through a process for us to make those changes without having to go back through more primary legislation.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to questions from Fulton McGregor on exemptions. Fulton.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. My apologies for being slightly late in today as well. As the Convener says, just got a couple of questions on exemptions. I'm wondering, Minister, what consideration was given to including further exemptions in the bill for things like people, travelling for medical or court appearances, for example, or accommodation providers such as those with a charitable status? Was there any consideration given to that?
So, again, officials can tell me right on the technicalities of this, but local authorities do have the ability to be able to do that themselves. So, in the scenarios you're painting, local authorities do have that power and they'll be able to judge on whether they wanted to use that locally.
So, they've got that power within this the bill currently?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so there wasn't any further consideration given to including these in the visitor levy Scotland Amendment regulations that we're looking at later at today?
No, what we've so we've left the local authorities have got the ability to add further exemptions if they decide that makes sense locally. I think that's the right approach because it gives them that flexibility to do that. And the regulations is round about a technical issue on the disability exemptions, which redefines or clarifies the definition of the scope. But David might want to talk to that.
Yeah, just one point I think that's worth making. What effectively you'd be suggesting is another national exemption under the Scotland Act. This is a local discretionary tax, and therefore the presumption is on delegating and allowing local authorities to design this that meets their local context and local needs. So for each national element that you're putting on, you're making it more and more national. So there needs to be I suppose an assessment done about need. Local authorities, clearly some local authorities will have more of a context where people are coming in to their local area to use accommodation for the purposes which you set out. So it would be for that local authority to consider that while they're designing their scheme. I believe Highland were considering that for their next iteration of their local scheme. Of course, we haven't seen that yet, but Highland clearly are one of those local authorities where they're going to get more people coming in for hospital stays. So that would be an appropriate thing for them to consider as they're designing their scheme. But in terms of whether or not we have looked at that, the presumption of this bill was not a heavy-handed, if you like, attempt to amend the bill. So it wasn't, what can we possibly do to amend every possible thing? It was, what do we need to do in order to meet the purposes of the flexibility, and local authorities already have that flexibility within the original legislation. So I hope that helps.
That's helpful. Do you not think, though, that the couple of examples that I gave there, they would be things that would be beneficial to have at a national level? Because my understanding from what you're saying is that you could have situations where hospital appointments would be exempt in some local authorities and not in others, same with court appearances. And do you not think that that then, you know, gives a wee bit of a confused message across the board? So you're mentioning Highland there, where they might well go ahead and put it in because they're getting a lot of, a lot of people travelling to use their hospitals. But if you take, for example, Monklands Hospital within my area, which will be a new hospital within a few years, and may well get people as well. But if North Lanarkshire haven't put that in, people are getting a tourist tax on that. You know, it's.
I think in some senses what we're getting into is a debate about the extent to which something is localised or not, and I think that is probably when it comes down to advice to ministers to make that call, because there will always be a line between what is a national element and what is a local element, and a local tax by its very nature is something where you are designing it for local need as much as possible. So I understand what you're saying, but it's one of those things where advice would go to ministers and ministers would make the final determination.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Okay, thanks very much. I guess there's an example there of what Paul McGregor's getting at. Like, very good example is people in the Western Isles that depend on hospital appointments in Glasgow. So some kind of discussion and relationship and collaboration between the two local authorities of what's going on there. I'm now going to bring in Willie Coffey on the financial memorandum.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Minister, and to your officials. We received a submission from the Finance Committee that was suggesting that we've underestimated the costs associated with the bill and the financial memorandum. So it was just to ask you your views on that and what kind of engagement you had with stakeholders in developing the financial memorandum in the first place.
So there's also been engagement with stakeholders, as you would expect, to pull together what's in the financial memorandum, and clearly we've indicated there are a number of areas where there will be amendments at later stages, and some of the parameters are still to be defined as we hear evidence from different stakeholders. So there will be, as you'd expect, the financial memorandum will evolve as we go forward. So there has been engagement. At this point is our best appraisal of what the numbers are. But as I said, those will obviously change depending on how the parameters in the bill change going forward.
Great. Fife were suggesting to us that, you know, as far as possible, you should be supporting your calculations using as much local data as we can. So have you taken that into account to try and shape how the financial memorandum will look to draw in as much localised data as possible?
Well, there has been engagement. I'll let officials talk to the level of engagement there's been on the FM.
I think the issue is for the amending bill, it's projections. So we've got no live schemes on which to base existing figures. So it's then difficult to adjust of if a local authority chose the per person per night, how they band that. It's the parameters are quite wide, so to be able to work out what the financial implications could be. But as the Minister said, it's something we are reviewing as the bill proceeds, and we'll look to refine data as we can. But without there being live schemes, it's difficult to really nail down figures.
Okay. Thanks for that. Thank you.
It will depend on what schemes are chosen to be implemented locally. Will have a bearing on what the costs are. But it's also worth bearing in mind that what we talked about earlier in terms of simplifying the scheme, this leads to a scenario where the cost on business is actually lower as a consequence of these amendments than it otherwise would have been had that flexibility and simplicity not been available to them.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to get a bit technical and dig in a bit on a few things. So I'm going to go back to section 6, and I just want to get a sense, and so this is around the cruise ship levy. So is section 6 in there to be able to give the government the opportunity to include things like a point of entry levy or a cruise ship levy? into this into the Visual Levy Scotland Act, or would there be a completely separate piece of primary legislation needed, given it's a slightly different, it's a different mechanism in a way?
Those would be separate pieces of legislation if we chose to take those forward.
Okay, and just because that's more in the mix of what our three island authorities are looking for, I think. When could we see that potentially coming forward to help them?
Well, at the moment, we've obviously gone through a consultation process on cruise ship levy, and that is being considered and analysed as we speak. And clearly, with an election coming up, this is something that will fall into that post-election period, and any future government would obviously look at that consultation and the results from it and decide how they want to proceed on that.
Right. Okay. So it'll be up to them. There's the three island authorities to make sure that stays at the forefront of whoever's in government's mind. Yeah. Okay. Now I am going to get even more technical. So just coming back to that, my third question earlier about chargeable transactions, the two different ones. So I've got the bill here. So it says in Part 1, Section 2, 4A, basis on which a levy is to be charged. A local authority seeking to introduce a visual levy scheme must determine whether the levy to be charged in respect of each chargeable transaction to which the scheme relates is to be on the basis of either a percentage rate or percentage rate set in accordance with Section 6 or a fixed amount or fixed amounts set in accordance with Section 6A. So just again, a bit of concern that you could end up with a business being subject to both of them. Is it clear?
So as indicated earlier, that is, as you understand it, and I'm going to let officials talk to the technical aspects of that, that is not how, that provision is not there. So a business would not find themselves in a position where they would be subject to both of those simultaneously.
Do you want to?
Yeah. Going to bring a lawyer at this point.
Michael.
So the ability for local authorities to introduce more than one scheme is obviously part of the 2024 Act, already there. The bill does not amend that. There is a possibility that multiple schemes could operate within the same area and use different either fixed amounts or percentage rates. And the local authorities, if they have to introduce that, they would have to consult and include that in the consultation, the justification of how that would have to operate and any interaction. We cannot conclusively determine whether it would be lawful for those authorities to apply more than one scheme to a single transaction. That would have to be something that the authorities themselves would have to take advice on and, as I said, include appropriate justification in their consultation for the scheme that they propose to introduce.
Okay, so it could be that a business gets caught up in both schemes.
That's something we cannot conclusively exclude at the moment.
Right. Because that might be something for concern then, potentially.
I think the key thing here is that no local authority under the existing legislation has looked to come up with multiple schemes. Now, a different basis of charge introduces a different equation on that, or a different question, I suppose. Equally, what you're looking there is at, I suppose, multiple taxation would be laid on top of each other, and I think that would be quite unusual. It would be for a local authority, even if that was possible, they would have to go through their own legal department in terms of designing the scheme, and they would also have to justify that both to the local forum in terms of the consultation process that they're going through, and then to the local elected members in order to produce a scheme. So, I'm not saying that means it wouldn't happen if it was legally possible, but it would seem to be something that they would have to come up with a justification as to why they would do it. and that I can't, you know, sitting here today, I can't say that nobody would, but at the moment I can't see why anybody would wish to do so, particularly when there are multiple abilities now within much more flexibility, as we've been saying through the evidence. That's the purpose of this, but it's something I think that we'll listen to and consider as we go forward through the bill process.
Okay, thank you. So this legislation can't stop that for some legal reasons, but it can be prevented through the checks and balances in the local authority sphere.
I think the way I would phrase it is it's neither allowed nor not allowed. You know, it's not defined within the legislation, so I suppose there is a question there about whether or not it's allowed or not, and I suppose the question there is about whether or not that's something that we should look at before the bill becomes an act, if it does so.
Okay, and sort of like a kind of a keenness for local authorities, as you said, to take legal advice if they were going to.
I mean, local authorities should be considering their scheme's legality as they're designing it and putting it to consultation, indeed before it's ratified, because ultimately they are the ones who are responsible for what they do in their local area.
So that concludes our questions on the amendment bill. And now we've got just actually one question on the subordinate legislation related to the existing Act. So I'd be interested to understand, in your view, how the instruments that the committee is considering today potentially impact the proposals in the bill that we've just been talking about.
Sorry, with regards to the regulation.
Yes. Do they have any impact on the bill? No, no impact on the bill. All right, great, thank you.
Sorry, Fiona, do you want to say something? Yeah.
So the three statutory instruments are around implementing the 2024 Act as is. So it was extending the disability exemption, allowing a local authority to make or substitute an assessment, and the appeals and reviews processes. They are needed whatever happens with the bill.
Great. Thanks for that clarity. So we're going to now move on to... so thank you for your evidence on that part. It's a bit confusing because we've got all this visitor levy bit. And now we're going to turn to agenda item 4, which is the formal consideration of these three SSIs. So we're going to just go through that process. So the first motion is S6M 20366, which calls for the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee to recommend approval of the Visitor Levy Local Authority Assessment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft. And I invite the Minister to, if you wish to speak to, but move the motion.
I just moved formally.
Thank you. I'll note that you did speak to them earlier. And now invite contributions from members. Any members wish to speak? No. I'm going to miss that. The question is that motion S6M 20366 in the name of... Oh, well, we didn't. Okay, so I have to go through a formal process and invite the Minister to sum up and respond to the debate.
No further comments, Convener.
The question is that motion S6M 20366 in the name of Ivan McKee be approved. Are we all agreed? We're agreed. Thank you. The second motion is S6M 20365, which calls for the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee to recommend approval of the Visitor Levy Reviews and Appeals Scotland Regulations 2026. And I invite the Minister to add anything further to what he said earlier and move the motion.
Nothing further to add. Moved formally.
Thank you. I now invite contributions from members. No? Okay. Minister, if you would like to add anything.
Nothing further to add.
The question is that motion S6M 20365 in the name of Ivan McKee be approved. Are we all agreed? We're agreed. Thank you. The third and final motion is S6M 20509, which calls for the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee to recommend approval of the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024 Amendment Regulations 2026 draft. And Minister, if you would like to add anything more to what you said Could you move the motion?
Nothing to add and moved.
Thank you very much. Would any members wish to speak? No. Minister, would you like to add anything to?
Nothing further to add.
Further to add. The question is that motion S6M 20509 in the name of Ivan McKee be approved. Are we all agreed? We're agreed. So the committee will report on the outcome of the 3 instruments in due course, and I invite the committee to delegate responsibility to me as convener to approve a draft of this report for publication. We agreed? Agreed. And I just want to thank the Minister and his officials for joining us this morning. We're now going to take a short break so that we can allow our guests to leave the table.
Thank you.
We now turn to agenda item 5, which is formal consideration of 1 negative instrument, Visitor Levy Interest on Unpaid Levy and Penalties Scotland Regulations 2026, SSI 2026/9. Do members have any comments on the instrument? No one has any comments. Does the committee agree that we do not wish to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument? We're agreed. Thank you. We now turn to agenda item 6, which is the formal consideration of 2 further negative instruments. The Local Governance Scotland Act 2004 Remuneration Amendment Regulations 2026, SSI 2026/1, and the Building Fees Scotland Amendment Regulations 2026, SSI 2026/7. Do any members have comments on either of these instruments? No one has any comments. Does the committee agree that we do not wish to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument? We agreed. Thank you. And I just want to go back to the beginning of the meeting. I asked for items that we were going to take in private, and I just need to update that. So I would like us to decide whether we wish to take items 7 and 8 in private. Our members agreed. We're agreed. Thank you. And that concludes the public part of the meeting. We'll now move into private.